Tim of the 1916 Company. Good morning and welcome to Watches Today. This morning, we're discussing watches that bombed, why, and whether you should buy them in the aftermath. All of that, plus we share your wrist shots today on Watches Today. Get yourself some coffee, warm up, open Instagram, check out Tim_Masso. I'm only bringing the heat. These are the best watches we've got, hand-selected by me. This is by an older millennial for a Generation Z attention span. But if you are a boomer or an X, we love you. Find the best watches in 1-minute review segments on Tim Masso on Instagram. All right. Instant gratification, guys. I asked, you answered. Wrist shots. We're starting off with our own Josh Thanos, a good friend and a longtime member of our team back to the Watch You Want days. He just bought his first Debatoon, a DB22, which is a 48mm watch, but he used AI to scale it down to a DB22XS that would be hypothetically 40mm with an integrated bracelet. I have to say that actually looks pretty cool. Otherwise, Josh, enjoy your full-sized real thing, and welcome to the club. A friend shares his Debatoon DB25 Stradivarius GMT. Very cool, my man. My DBD says hi. Dr. Ron and his Vacheron Constantin Overseas fight the cold with a stogie in Calgary, Alberta. Leonardo C. roars through the Italian Alps with his vintage Porsche 911 and a Breitling chronomat that is, believe it or not, a vintage watch in its own right at this point. Russell H. of the UK keeps our UK Talking Time with Tim Masso chapter on time with Squash My Pug in the upper left and his Vacheron Constantin Overseas self-winding. Send your wrist shots to Monday Mailbag at the1916company.com. We will get a new email extension for that in due time. It is still Monday Mailbag. Guys, these watches failed, but I've got to ask, should you buy them? Most watches, let's be perfectly honest, are neither a roaring success nor an historic blunder. They appear, they get a press release, and 1 year of trade shows and magazine publications in the limelight. And then they mostly vanish into the pack. Really, when was the last time we talked about Piaget's Polo S? Or the Grand Seiko SBGE 257? They're out there just sort of treading water. They've got their fans, but these weren't blockbusters, nor did they leave an impact crater. But the extremes of the market are what I find most interesting from a storyteller's perspective. And since we don't really need to hear about the success of moon swatches or hype watches, today's show's gonna focus on those that failed to launch, or perhaps launched and failed. Are you ready, guys? Let's start with the most famous botched launch of modern times. Now we're in the Hall of Fame, and we're starting off with a big gun from Audemars Piguet, the Code 1159. That's the original version of the chronograph. Guys, once upon a time, AP had a dress watch called the Jules Audemars. There were lovely white gold lacquer dial chronographs, limited editions like the Stade Classic, tourbillon regulators, some with engraving and skeletonization, and skeleton complications that combine a chronograph, skeletonization, and a tourbillon all together. These were great watches, but in a world where the Royal Oak rules, AP didn't, let's say, promote them with conviction, and they withered on the vine, replaced for 2019. AP just didn't have much passion for promoting these, so a wholesale redesign of dress watches was ordered, and the Jules Audemars went away in early 2019, supplanted by the 2019 Code 1159. Which was a mess for reasons that should have been caught, if we're honest, on pre-production prototypes. We've all seen those early testing versions of unreleased cars. They're covered in camouflage, trash bags, all sorts of disguises. They look unfinished for a reason. They are. This looks like one of those early phase car prototypes before it makes it to the auto show debut. They should not have brought this to market. Massive size, brutalist style, and flat featureless dials on the mainstream automatic and chronograph variants sank this ship before it even left the dock. And I'm not being too harsh here because I actually like this watch. It has some desirable qualities, but it was not ready. Like a gingerbread man that comes out of the oven either too crispy or too soft, they should have spent a bit more time and a bit more care making it just right. So, Here's what it did right out of the gate. The complications look fantastic. Aventurine dial perpetual calendar, enamel dial sonnerie or tourbillon, I loved them. But it was the basic code that looked anodyne and generic, like something you'd find on AliExpress. It was made with great care and attention to detail, but especially in the press photos, it didn't look that way. The internet got involved, and it became a pile-on before SIHH that year. By Watches and Wonders in February of 2019, remember that one was in Miami, AP was in damage control mode. I spoke to AP people on the ground at Watches and Wonders in 2019, and they told me that the ambition for this launch went from not 0 to 60, but 60 to 0, basically. They went from an ambition to sell thousands in the first year to maybe a few hundred. And my gosh, was that retrenching, because the year prior, they told us with no shortage of relish that the Jules Audemars line was going away and something incredible was going to follow. This did not quite live up to the billing. It did get better, and I would be remiss to fail to mention that the first thing they fixed was more colorful dials. They added enamel, then lacquer, then texture, stamped guilloche. They added smaller cases at 38 millimeters. And to be fair, even the earlier ones look better in person than in the photos. The cases, even the dials from anything but a soldier shot front on, the remarkable dihedral bent sapphires, the hollow lugs, all of this was really, really cool, and it just didn't translate in the initial photographs. In the hand, even the first pre-revision versions were a lot better. And that is why I say these are worth your money and your time. They're genuinely nice watches. The problem they had then and the problem they have now is that they exist under a brand that is mostly interested in selling you various kinds of Royal Oaks. Also, the lug-to-lug dimensions are fairly massive at about 50 millimeters for the 41 millimeter standard watch, and the case design, although not really thick in an absolute sense, has a very brutal and relentlessly harsh aesthetic to it. It doesn't have the curvaceous appeal or the sensuous qualities of the old Jules Audemars, but it is a very well-made watch. Real money was spent here, and due to depreciation, you can actually make some of those early setbacks work for you, especially if you're looking for a complication or something post-2019. The Jules Audemars successor, Code 1159, actually has a lot to offer. Okay, there are a few brands that I admire more than Tudor, but not many. Tudor's got it going on. In the 2010s, it relaunched internationally across different markets, refashioned its identity around vintage tribute styles, and became a true manufacturer with its own movements. But the Rolex sister brand's biggest failure during this otherwise purple patch of success was a fascinating watch that was probably just too far ahead of its time for its own good. Of course, I speak of the North Flag. Who the hell wanted an integrated bracelet steel sports watch in a tonneau case back in 2015? Nobody, that's who. It was interesting because it was also Tudor's debut as a manufacturer, so they had a display case back and an in-house movement to boast. Keep in mind, though, that this is when Watch You Want, our predecessor company, we were buying 5711s for 16 grand and selling them for about 20 grand. So the North Flag was exactly the right kind of watch at the wrong time. This style, if launched 4 years later, might have been a blockbuster. It wasn't a Black Bay in 2015, however, so nobody cared. They remain tremendous buys today with lots of value, and the prices are very reasonable. Even on a full bracelet, you're getting this thing for right under $5,000 full set, and I cannot recommend them enough. It's a complication too with a date and a power reserve, and I'll say this, it's a great product from a great brand, and these will be collectible. Go on Chrono, do a search, see how few of them are actually on the market. This is a genuinely rare watch, and rarity from a strong brand in hindsight is always rocket fuel for collectability in the long run. Guys, viewers shots number 2. Spencer K. impresses with his Land Rover Defender 110 and Garrick S4, a Pennsylvania boy too. My S6 says hi. Jeff S. continues to impress with the latest Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch Gray Side of the Moon, and I am impressed. Ben 10 rocks with JLC and the Master Control Calendar. Look at that granular dial. Stephen E. entertains with his colorful Alexander Shurikoff Candy Avant-Garde 2. It scorches my retinas. Neil S. is ready for a night out with the Cartier Tank must XL. Send your wrist shots to Monday Mailbag at the1916company.com to see your wrist on my list. Guys, these watches failed, but the question remains, should you buy them? Most watch enthusiasts who have followed the market long term remember a time when Breitling was more of a punchline than a powerhouse in the marketplace. Huge watches, aging designs, and dated marketing driven by pseudo-military bluster, 90s inertia, and John Travolta had led the company to the brink of crisis by early 2017. Fortunately, help was on the way. Breitling today is a trimmer, more muscular, far better run organization, and the watches are just better across the board. The comeback isn't complete, but general esteem for the brand is probably higher today than at any point since the heady days of the early 2000s. It didn't start that way. I was part of a group of mostly journalists and influencers invited to the Brooklyn Navy Yard in February of 2018 for a lavish launch ceremony of a new Breitling Navitimer line. It was billed at the time as Breitling's comeback watch. The Navitimer 8 collection, however, was not the comeback watch Breitling needed. Even as a chronograph, it didn't look like a Navitimer or even a Breitling. Many of its problems were similar to those of the AP Code 1159. The Navitimer 8 looked unfinished, austere, almost like a pre-production mock-up prototype, 2 or 3 revisions removed from the final consumer version of what should have made it to market. I don't think this was the plan. In fact, I think this goes back quite a bit. Months previous to that 2018 launch, I had heard straight from top sources that Breitling had a new line in the works called Aviator. The watch was explained to me in late 2017, only a few months after the new management's buyout of Breitling, and literally like 3 or 4 months after new CEO Georges Kern took control. I believe that the design and the model line were inherited in an advanced state of development from the previous ownership. And I suspect the new team did its best to take what was, by that point, fully paid for and an inevitable launch, and put on a brave face, launch it in earnest, and change the name to Navitimer in an effort to link it to Breitling's best known and most enduring model. The anticipated halo effect, however, did not pan out. And the brand, to be perfectly honest, changed the name back to Aviator after a short while to decouple this declining collection from the Navitimer, as the Navitimer is an all-time property whose brand equity cannot be risked. First, the name was changed back to Aviator, and then the collection was gracefully and quietly sunset. And I would say this, the full force of Georges Kern's vision for the brand was not ready in February of 2018, but as of today, Breitling as a company and as a model line, unrecognizable as the company and collection it was at the time of the buyout. And I mean that in the best possible way. So unless, and that is a watch, by the way, that is like a keystone of modern Breitling design, everything seems to riff off the refined elegance of pieces like this. Whether it's a dress watch or a sports watch, a Navitimer or a Super Ocean, that premier pistachio announced in no uncertain terms that Breitling was back, and its like has proliferated across the range. So unless you're absolutely in love with these Navitimer 8s, I think a classical Navitimer, a chronograph with a slide rule, the elegant Premier, or the ever-popular Super Ocean is a better place to invest your money in a Breitling these days. All right, now we're going high horology. Sometimes it does seem like Patek Philippe can simply do no wrong. Even when a watch is a little bit controversial, or a lot controversial, like the Cubitus of late 2024, it sells well, and once in the hand, it generally wins over its critics with the feel, the build quality, and the aesthetic in the metal. Historic controversies like the Neptune have even become downright collectible with time, but one Patek Philippe has never found a niche, acceptance, or a willing collector, and that is the so-called sculpture. Take that in. Created for the Russian market, in 1999, it's commonly known as the Russian watch. It wasn't a hit then, and it isn't one now. Almost a Fabergé egg, or a version of St. Basil's Cathedral that you can wear on your wrist. Even the steel models are controversial, and two-tone examples of the sculpture are a riot of wild shapes, Roman numeral dials, and that crazy integrated bracelet. And I feel like these have been born a parallel universe removed from the usual Patek bracelet designs. Oddly, prices of the more broadly accepted 1990s Neptune aren't really higher than those asked for the more controversial sculpture 5091, but find me a person who owns and professes to love the sculpture, and that will be the first such person I have met. But with only 2,700 made across a reported 9 variants, this is a rare full bracelet Patek steel sports watch, sometimes with some gold, that is uncommon anywhere and even more so in Western markets. It is genuinely rare, and any given variant even more so. I actually dig it, and for a certain kind of iconoclast, perhaps the never cubitous crowd, let's call them, this could have some collectible upside and maybe even a little bit of subversive cool, if you know what I mean. Viewer Wristshots number 3. Nathaniel K. of South Florida takes the road by storm with his Cartier Santos Dumont Eastern Arabic dial. Philippe L. is deep in thought with his Omega Speedmaster Broad Arrow Rattrapant. Excellent choice. Edward H. from New South Wales, Australia joins us with Blancpain at the Mad Max 2 Museum, which apparently exists. We have Eric O., who shares a shot of Mrs. O. with a glass of white and her Rolex DJ Rosé dial from Napa. Matt N. visits Fashion Island in Newport Beach, California, not far from our store, with his Louis-Ulysse Chopard Time Traveler 1. Guys, send your wrist shots to Monday Mailbag at the1916company.com to see your pieces on these pixels. More failures and whether you should buy them. And I got to tell you, these are some of my favorites of the entire show. Can a watch fail so spectacularly that it changes the way an entire company does business? The 2017 IWC Da Vinci certainly proved the point, and the answer was yes. Okay, IWC model years, a quick primer. IWC used to redesign one entire model line each year: Aquatimer, Da Vinci, Ingenieur, Portuguese, or Pilot. And it worked that way seamlessly until 2017, when IWC called back to its mid-80s greatest hits designed by Hanno Böttcher. And the Da Vinci Perpetual Calendar Chronograph in 1985 was really a statement from IWC when it launched. A complicated mechanical watch, it announced firmly that IWC was back for the luxury mechanical watch era. It would not be going quartz, and it would not be going away. The original Da Vinci of 1985 was a landmark model, and it stayed in production for decades, spawning a split-second version and even a chronograph perpetual calendar with tourbillon. It was a brand builder, and it is an icon. Okay, here's the fallout. IWC struggled so badly with that Da Vinci launch, first convincing people to adopt this weird hinge lug watch and bringing back a mid-80s design in a larger case size. The people who were nostalgic for this watch were so old at that point that they were moving out of the collector's space, and the younger collectors of the Gen X and Millennial generation coming in had no knowledge of this watch or nostalgia for it. To them, it was a profoundly weird dress watch in a market that wanted sports watches. And it was such a disastrous debut that IWC decided subsequently almost all of its new model years would be headlined by a pilot's watch or a Portuguese redesign every single year. So even when there is a new Ingenieur or Aquatimer or Portofino, they always lead with their two strongest model lines, no longer one model line redesign per year. And that changed the entire way IWC launches watches. And to be fair, it has been a success for them, but I do miss the old days. And for the record, these Da Vincis are spectacular. Some of these IWC models are loaded with complications. Tourbillon, date, retrograde, chronograph, you got it, my man. These are beautiful watches that are beautifully made, better than the 80s originals in every way, loaded with features and value. I love them and recommend them without reservation. IWC delivered a great product. Don't expect a lot of mainstream validation, but hardcore collectors, old schoolers, and IWC diehards will embrace you. All of these are now a great buy. Okay, even a winner occasionally misses the mark. And in the case of the Zenith El Primero Retrotimer, it was a rare failure amid a historic run of good design that issued from Zenith beginning in 2010. Terry Nataf departed at the end of 2009, and his reign of terror, controversial and perhaps someday to be rehabilitated, ended. Jean-Frédéric Dufour, who would later go on to helm Rolex, absolutely ran gangbusters with Zenith design from 2010 to 2014. In fact, it was that run of successful designs and the rehabilitation of a troubled brand that won him the chief job at Rolex. It was deeply impressive. But the Retrotimer, which you see right here, an always running flyback chronograph, was the odd man out. It was a watch that was difficult to communicate, difficult to explain, and so far outside the chronograph mainstream that in the period right after the financial crisis, it simply required too much energy to explain to a person why they should buy this instead of a standard caliber 400 El Primero. There was also a black version with a carbon-style dial, a rubber strap, and DLC. It didn't matter. Super rare, misunderstood, super cool. They only made about 1,000, and I sent an email to Zenith and they confirmed this. The vast majority are that one on the strap. I've only seen a real-world silver dial on a bracelet once since 2010. So if you want a super collectible, red-hot watch from one of the coolest brands ever to make a timekeeper, the Zenith El Primero Retrotimer. I want one, and if you have one, I am jealous of you. Guys, super cool. And your Wristshots, even better. Viewer Wristshots number 4. Steve T and his Omega Moonwatch prepare a French-pressed cup of NASA-branded coffee. Gus G of Athens, Georgia, shares his Seiko SSK003 GMT, his first mechanical watch, the first of many. Richard G of Oregon hits the trails with his 2 Casiokes and a properly geared off-road Wrangler from Jeep. Sarab P and Enzo the dog mutually appreciate the Doxa Sub Seafoam, and Alex P takes us home fully suited with his JLC Reverso Grand Tie from the 1990s. Send your Wristshots to Monday Mailbag at the1916company.com and tell me, what are your favorite failed launches, watches you would like to own, and in retrospect, think deserved better from the market? Tell me in the comments below. And until next time, time out.